today we're talking about the handstand blocks. Basically, what are they, how would you use them, why would you use them, advantages, disadvantages, all that stuff, because I get a lot of questions on them, and I think a lot of people just aren't sure kind of where they fit into the whole process of the handstand training. So what are they? Literally just wooden blocks. These are from the Beyond Balance shop. You can get a discount code if you want your own. I'll put it up at the bottom. But yeah, they're wooden blocks. You do handstands on them. There's a ton of different designs. You know, these in particular are hollow and screwed together. I've made some that are hollow and glued together. I've seen some that have kind of interlacing between the parts, which is also kind of cool. There's a few companies that make them. They're also not that hard to make on your own. Some are solid. You know, a more kind of ghetto version would be just cutting a 4x4. Whatever version of blocks that you use, however, I do recommend that you take the edges down. Make sure so you can see these blocks. One reason I like them is they have a really round edge. I'm focusing on my face, but this is important because if the edge is sharp and you grip too hard, it's going to dig into your fingers. And actually my first few experiences with the blocks so many years ago, they didn't have rounded edges. And at that point I was used to gripping very hard with the fingers. And actually it dug into the fingers so much that I lost feeling in a couple of fingers for some days. So basically, whether you make your own blocks or whether you get them, make sure that you take a sander, a router to the edge, something that it's more comfortable for gripping. So why would you use blocks and when? When? They're an apparatus, right, for handstands. So I think the base handstand should always come from the floor. So generally I wouldn't recommend somebody using blocks until they have a decent floor handstand, until they already understand how to balance themselves. Because before that, you know, an apparatus just isn't useful because they don't have a basic handstand. Following that, I generally don't put blocks into the schedule until somebody gets more into one-arm training. But there is an advantage with the blocks. So basically, it allows you a better grip than you would on floor. So if you're balancing on floor, usually the middle joint of your finger is going to come up a little bit when you have that grip. So the surface area that you're gripping with is a little bit less than your full hand. With the blocks, you actually get a lot more gripping leverage because your fingers can drape over the edge like this, and it just gives you a better grip, so it's more comfortable. Some blocks, usually square is typical, rectangular, but some blocks are even round if you prefer that. I personally don't. How to grip the blocks. So you want to make sure the block is big enough that you can fit the majority of the palm of your hand. If you're putting the palm of your hand down and it's kind of like draping over, you know, the edges of the block, then that block is too small and it's just going to make it more difficult. Not that you can't use it like that, because you know, even these blocks I can grab like this and then my palm is bigger than the surface area of the block, but that's something that's a bit more difficult, so that's more challenging. So typically you want to grab with the whole palm and then have a bit of the finger draping over the edge like this, so you get a solid grip. Now these blocks are pretty big. I don't necessarily have big hands, but I do like a bigger block. But it's good to know kind of the size of the block because these blocks I think would be big for most people. And then typically you're going to grab either like this, 2 fingers in front, or 3 fingers in front. You don't want to grab it like this because then you have no kind of side-to-side corrections. So you want at least 1 finger or 2 finger on the sides of the block. Again, that depends on the shape of your hand, your preference, the size of the block. So it just kind of gives you a better base of support. And again, because blocks are more of a one-arm training tool, you do have to start incorporating that side-to-side balance. Some people do also find the grip of the block tends to be a little bit less stress, a little bit easier on the wrist, so that's another reason to use them. And then going even further with that, you might see some blocks. Personally, I like them flat, but you might see some blocks that are on an incline, and that could be either for somebody who doesn't have very good wrist extension, or it could be useful for somebody who's working acro, where the angle that they balance on is not going to be flat, but actually a little bit downward. That's going to feel very different on the grip and the fingers, so it's something to get used to, but just know that it does happen, and that it is a possibility for blocks. So the balance is essentially the same on blocks versus floor. You grip, you move forwards and backwards with the hand and the fingers. The main difference is, for me, when I balance on blocks, I tend to shift a little bit more weight towards the fingers. And it's not right or wrong, this is just kind of when I balance on floor, I tend to put most of the weight on the heel of my hand, and then I actually relax the fingers and only grip when I have to. So it's like I have moments where I don't grip at all, and then I grip. With the blocks, this is not very advantageous to let go of the grip and then grip again. So in order to maintain a constant grip, I shift slightly more weight towards my fingers. And that's especially the case when I do one arm. So I know when I go from floor to blocks and I have to recalibrate, one of the things I do is that when I go to one arm on the blocks, I have to shift about 20% of my weight further forward than I would as if I was on floor, just to take advantage of that grip and to make sure I don't dump too much of the weight into the heel of my hand. But yeah, so anything two-arm on blocks, it's going to be the same. I think one advantage also compared to floor is that the blocks are a bit more sensitive to the shoulders leaning forward. So in some cases, the blocks can help with that mini planche. Not all the time, but as I said, I find that when you're on the blocks, your wrists are a bit more sensitive to that additional forward lean compared to the floor. But the main purpose that I think that I would use the blocks for in general is the stacking drills. So in this case, we are getting pretty advanced. This is at the point where you can do some one-arm shifting techniques, and you're starting to work towards the one-arm handstand. You basically do some drills where you move up and down the blocks, and this can help with weight shift for the handstand. It can help with building strength. It can help with building endurance. It's not necessary for the one-arm handstand to be able to do it. However, it's very helpful as assistance work. So I'll go through a couple of those exercises now. So I'm not going to show you in a handstand right now, but here are some of the block exercises that I find the most useful. And as I said, you don't need this for a one arm, but it's very, very helpful to be able to incorporate these. So first one I usually teach is to go down. So handstand on the blocks, shift, shift, and then back in a two-arm handstand. Right, easy, no worries, you just work on shifting side to side, but also you have this up and down element, so you experience the handstand in a few different positions. Next one would be going up. So this one involves a much more powerful push of the trapezius, right? So from here, your weight is evenly distributed. You can go one arm this way, and then you can go one arm this way, and in this case you really have to push, so it's developing also the strength required. Once you can do that, you can move on to what I would consider like the basic block exercise, and that would be going down and then going up. And keep in mind, you can do this, so many different ways. You can go slow and really focus on the shift. You can go fast and focus on finding balance. You can incorporate one arm handstand every time you shift. So there's so many variations you can do with the blocks, and that's why they're so cool. And of course they are portable as well, so as far as apparatuses go, these are very easy to take with you. I've even seen certain blocks that had holes drilled in, so if they stopped you at the airport, you could prove that you weren't smuggling drugs inside of them. So variation of the up and down is to also tilt the blocks on the side. This one is a bit more difficult because you have a much smaller surface area to hold and balance on. And then you can also go here, which is a bit more risky. Sometimes you have to really be sure of your balance, because if the floor is uneven or if you don't put the weight directly downwards, the block can collapse, which may not be fun. And then you can also do lateral shifting. So I'll show you with 2 blocks, and then with multiple blocks you can do more. So actually I'll show you with 4 blocks first. So another very standard block exercise that you'll see in the circus schools is you go here, and then you shift side to side, side to side, side to side, side to side. The other thing you can do that I like is to go in between. So you lay them out with enough space, And what you would do is you'd go like this, lateral shifting, but from the blocks to the floor. So another interesting exercise, of course, you can do up and down with 2. This is really good for developing shoulder strength as well. So you go here, and then the interesting thing as well is not only do you have to hold the one-arm handstand and be solid, but now you also have to be careful with the placement of the block. So now you're also dividing your focus and your awareness into building the nice block stance, because sometimes you'll put the block here and then you have to reach for it and you lose the set. And then of course going up, you go 1, 2, 3, and then this is the hardest one because what you have to do is sink a little bit to be able to reach the block, and then push as you get up onto the hands. So it's not by any means an exhaustive list of exercises, it's just a few that you can do if you have the interest, and it will help a lot with one arm because you experience different positions, you work on shifting, you get endurance, you get higher reps, you get more shoulder push, all of that. So conclusion on blocks, get a handstand first before you mess with them, then you can play with them whenever you want. Once you get into one-arm training, they become actually super useful. It's your preference what kind of blocks you want. You can make your own. You can buy a pair from a number of different companies. Hollow, solid, square, rectangular, circular. Actually, don't do square. Don't do square blocks. The dimensions of these blocks that I use, just to give you an idea, and I'll say they are on the bigger side, is about 2.5, 3 inches tall, about 4.5 inches across, and then 5.5 inches long ways. Metric system people, sorry, you have to make conversions. So just to give you an idea, again, you can tweak the size until you find something that works for you, just as long as it's comfortable. But yeah, so if you're working one arm, get yourself a pair of blocks and get to training. I'll post also one video from a few years ago when I was doing, back when my handstand training was very serious and I was doing like 2-3 hours a day, every day of handstands. I would do 1 day a week of only block training. So what I typically did was I would include a couple sets maybe in my warm-up, maybe in conditioning at the end of the workout, and then typically Thursday was my block day where the whole training session would just be different block movements. So I'll post that video also in the comments below if you want to check that out, just to see what my block training looked like. I want to say it was like 6 or 7 years ago now. So other than that, yeah, let me know if you have any questions on the blocks. I'll put up a discount code for these guys if you want to get a pair for yourself. And like, share, subscribe, let me know what else you want to see.